one of the most important thing is the right of any defendant to be represented by counsel, by a lawyer at least. That's the right every person who is arrested has in the country. Now, I have read some report online where people are saying that Mr. Alexandre is trying to weasel his way out of his bail condition. Now, that's totally incorrect. I think that Mr. Alexandre has every right to seek conditions that make it easy for him to defend himself. Now, normally, let me just walk you through this, and I think I've said this. And before I go over Mr. Alexandre bail condition, let me just explain something. When a person is arrested in this country, the person is presumed innocent. It's simply an accusation, and that person continue to have that presumption until a jury of his peer hears the evidence, then decide whether or not the person is guilty or innocent. Once the jury decides the person is guilty or innocent or guilty, at that point the person is then convicted. Okay, but until that point, the person is innocent. So for all intents and purposes, Mr. Alexandre is innocent until proven guilty. Now, let's talk about the bail condition. I know I've mentioned that in a prior video about bail. So let's go into his specific case. What was his bail condition? Now, and his bail condition based on the court that he needs a $3 million bond co-signed by 5 financially responsible persons and secured by 3 residential properties and 1 vehicle. So in other words, the $3 million bail, the 5 people will sign, say, hey, if he skip town or if he moved to Cuba, we're going to pay the government the $2 million plus 3 houses. Okay, that's one thing. Then consent to extradition to the United States in order to face charges pending in the complaint from any country in which Mr. Alexandre is detained should he leave the United States during his case. Now, normally that condition is really not part of a bail of a bail package, unless the government has reason to believe that the defendant may leave town. Okay. The other condition is home incarceration enforced by location monitoring. So that means is that Mr. Alexandre would have to stay home and he would have to have an ankle bracelet that would monitor his whereabouts. Okay. Supervision by pretrial services. I explained before that in the federal system, when somebody gets arrested, there's a pretrial services that kind of monitor the defendant. You have to report, every week to pretrial. And if you are, if you are going somewhere, you have to call them and let them know that you're going somewhere. That's another one. The other one, consent to FBI or pretrial services maintaining possession of Mr. Alexandre's passport and no new application for travel documents. Now, normally when somebody is arrested, if they have a passport, especially in the case of somebody like Mr. Alexandre, the government will confiscate that passport. They will take it from you and you would not be able to travel. Now, there are instances where people under indictment have been able to travel, and that is because they look at the seriousness of the crime, the likelihood that the defendant will not return. So if they believe that the crime is not that serious or the defendant will return, sometimes they allow the defendant to travel, even though the defendant is under indictment or has a bail condition. The other one is travel limited to court appearances, consul's office, religious service, except upon application of pretrial services in the government. So in other words, in this case, they limit Mr. Alexandre's travel to coming to court, going to see his lawyer, going to religious services. I mean, if he's 7 days Adventist, he needs to go to church. Mr. Alexandre, well, not a US citizen, but as a permanent resident, has a right to observe his religious belief. No one should interfere with that. Even if he was in prison, he would have that right. So they allow him to do that. The other condition is that Mr. Alexandre is not to have any new bank accounts or open any credit line without permission from withdrawal services, then he's not to work in the financial industry that is doing the pendency of this case, and no contact with witnesses or any investors other than family members. Now, here's what I want to talk about, guys. That condition that the court placed on Mr. Alexandre is so important because the court doesn't want Mr. Alexandre to speak to any witnesses who basically, have invested in MNEFX. Now, if he violates that particular condition, if the court finds out that Mr. Alexandre has been talking to investors and people who have invested, people giving him money, he can then have another charge for what we call witness tampering. So that's a condition has to be very important condition that he needs to make sure that doesn't happen. So certainly his lawyer, like I've said earlier, filed a motion seeking to change some of his bail condition, seeking to help him. Of course, that's his job. What he's supposed to do as a defense attorney. So it's not a question of Mr. Alexandre trying to weasel his way out of bail condition. It's a question of presenting a defense, having a lawyer, getting a defense. So the case is to be heard in front of Magistrate Sarah Netberg. And I want to explain this to you guys. In the federal court system, you have a magistrate and you have a judge, okay? So you probably wonder what's the difference between the judge and the magistrate. It's really in terms of experience and time. Magistrate often becomes judge, okay? So usually all the preliminary matters in the case are usually heard by the magistrate. In other words, the motion, for example, the letter that Mr. Emil Bove, the attorney for Mr. Alexandre filed, the letter was addressed to the magistrate, not the judge. So the magistrate will make a decision. Normally, if any of the parties do not agree with the magistrate decision, then they have the right then to go to the judge and seek review of that decision. So that's the reason why this letter is in front of the magistrate. What I find interesting is that it is the same magistrate that set up the initial bail, which seemed to me that the lawyer is asking the judge is asking the magistrate to overturn her own decision. So in other words, he said, look, the decision that you made before is not correct. You have to then consider the decision and make a different decision. Sometimes the court do that. They do reconsider their decision. But like I've explained before, is there are certain criteria. For example, if there was something that was overlooked, if the law had changed, or if there's some kind of intervening circumstances or new circumstances or change in circumstances, at that point, the court will reconsider its prior decision, because at the time the court made the decision, the court did not have all the specific information. So in this case, where Mr. Alexandre is trying to reduce his bail or trying to get rid of some of the condition, those things, the judge will look at them again. But I can tell you that if the judge did consider everything, which I think the magistrate did, that the likelihood of her changing her mind is it's very small. Okay, so thank you for watching this video. Keep coming back. Make sure you guys subscribe to my channel, and you would get information about the Eddy Alexandre case and updates, what's going on. And of course, there's another case that happens in Rockland County. The defendant is a Haitian American gentleman by the name of Willis Pierre. He went to trial, lost, convicted, and was sentenced to 84 months in prison. I would explain more about Willis Pierre. I would do a video and present what happened to him in his case, because I think that Willis Pierre case is very, very similar, the exact same crime. to Eddy Alexandre. And if anything, Eddy Alexandre should look into the Wooler Spear case and decide for himself whether he wants to put himself and his family to the gruesome part of a federal trial and federal court. Because if he's found guilty, he's looking at a lot of years. Thank you for watching, and keep coming back for more.
I would have closed